Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rourke Miller. I'm the Director of International Faculty and Scholar Services within the International Services and Engagement Office here at UC San Diego. Thank you very much for attending our workshop today on completing your federal tax return. We have with us today Professor Douglas Kelley from San Diego State University, where he's faculty and also leads the IRS VITA Center. VITA stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. So very pleased to have Doug with us today to go over the basics of federal income taxation and how to complete your federal tax return as a non-resident alien using Glacier Tax Prep. Before we get started, I just want to remind you all that there's also a tax workshop next week for the state tax return. I think that's Wednesday at noon. Information is on our website. You can sign up for that, just as you signed up for this workshop today. And also, if you have questions during this process, you can always reach out to us at internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu. That's all one word, internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu. Okay, I will ask Doug to share his presentation and start for us.
Good afternoon, Mark. Can you hear me just fine?
Yep.
Awesome. For some reason, my camera's not working, but honestly, my face is not the important piece here. But welcome, everyone. Sorry that you get to stare at a black screen for a minute. I'll go ahead and share my presentation so you can at least see that instead. I don't see that I have a sharing option. Oh, there we go. The big green button helps. And I'll share my screen. You should see the presentation tax workshops for foreign nationals now. And can I confirm that you can see that work?
Yes.
Cool, awesome. So welcome everyone. My name is Douglas Kelley. I am a guest lecturer at the Charles W. Landon School of Accountancy at San Diego State University. In the class I teach, as Rourke said, is Accounting 409, which is essentially SDSU's version of the IRS-sponsored VITA program. What's very unique about San Diego State, the VITA program there, is we focus 99% of our attention on foreign students and foreign scholar non-residents. There's no other VITA sites I'm aware of that can do this. So it's something special, some special skills that we teach our student volunteers to be able to effectively prepare these returns, which I would say most aren't complicated, like numerically, but they're complicated from a tax treaty standpoint. And what is the tax treaty with your specific country that the US has with your country, and how does that affect your tax return? But I mean, taxes as a whole aren't numerically difficult, right? It's more like, why am I adding these two numbers together? Do I have to add these two numbers together, not the addition of those two numbers? That's the easy part. So I've been teaching at San Diego State. This is my 6th year, but I had a 2-year gap. So outside of teaching at San Diego State, I am still active duty in the US Navy. I have been for almost 21 years now, 16 months and 19 days until my retirement from the US Navy, not that I'm counting. But at that point in time, I can then focus more attention on tax and tax law. I don't do that for the Navy. So for 2 years, I did VITA for 3 years, and then I had to go to the Pentagon in DC for 2 years, and then I returned back to San Diego, and this is my 3rd year back, so my 6th year teaching VITA at San Diego State. So that's who I am. With that, I'll get started with the presentation. Some of this I'll go a little more in depth with, and some I won't. Rourke has this presentation as well. I think it's going to be posted on the website. So for you to review, some of these items are really like you can read them and review them versus me briefing them to you. So with that, I will get started on what is not a numerically complicated issue, but just a law complicated issue. So before we begin, filing taxes means submitting tax forms or a tax return to the appropriate government agencies. Since you're at UCSD, I'm at San Diego State, I'm going to focus on California, not really like in detail, but when we talk about agencies for the federal government, that's the Internal Revenue Service. And for California, that's the Franchise Tax Board, right? So these are two different entities. So if you file your taxes and they say, hey, you're going to get a $700 refund from the IRS and a $300 refund state, or $700 federal, $300 state, they are mutually exclusive agencies, right? So you're not going to get a $1,000 refund in your bank account all at once. You're going to get two separate deposits of $700 and $300. Likewise, if you're getting a federal refund of $700 and you owe California $300, well, you can't go, hey, can federal take that? That's like if you have a friend named Jim and a friend named John. Jim owes you 40 and John, you owe 20. You can't say, hey, Jim, pay John, and then I'll worry about the other stuff later, right? These are mutually exclusive agencies that you're dealing with. You may be responsible for filing taxes every year that you're in the US in your status. We are going to discuss this year as in 2023. So right, we're filing your 2023 tax return in 2024. Right, so when we're talking about filing taxes for 2023, although that occurs in 2024, we're asking questions based on the end date of December 31, 2023. What was your status as of this date? How many years have you been in the US as of December 31, 2023? So 2024 days for this purpose don't count. And then UCSD still, and Roy can correct me if I'm wrong, offers Glacier tax software to assist you in preparing your tax returns.
That is correct.
Cool. That's what I thought, Roy. Just make sure my slides are still good there. That's good that you're still doing that. So SDSU's VITA program is open. I would say appointments are limited. We don't currently have any appointments. So, right, we are a volunteer base, right? And you have to be a student at San Diego State. And honestly, our enrollment for the class is down this year. Therefore, we didn't have as many appointments as we did last year. So this year, we'll still have about 250 appointments. I opened up essentially all of them on February 1st, and within 11 hours, they were all booked, right? And obviously people cancel, and there's sometimes cancel today, somebody signs up for one today, but they were all initially booked within like a 11-hour period. So we know the demand's there. We also know that there's more demand that we just can't meet, and that's unfortunate. But as I like to tell everyone, a free service does have its limits. Not that I impose those to not help people. I impose those because we just can't help people. But what I did do is there are a few additional appointments that I have reserved, and I will open those after this presentation today. It's probably 10 or so appointments that I did not open initially, and it's just, usually I save a little more before I give this presentation, but just due to not having as many appointments this year, I couldn't save as many. There are other services available, right? I just mentioned Sprint Tax, is you can do it yourself. There's also Glacier Tax as well, which we just talked about on the last slide. Yes. And you just one note, you cannot prepare non-resident tax returns inside TurboTax. Don't try it, don't do it, stay away. Essentially, if it is a commercially available tax software that you see a commercial for, you as a non-resident likely cannot use it. So we ask that you not attempt to do that. So the US tax system is considered a pay-as-you-go system. Income taxes are withheld from your pay as it is earned, right? So you may make $1,000 and they withhold $100 in federal tax. And that happens 52 times a year because you get paid every week. And you made $52,000, they withheld $5,200. That's an estimate, right? So when we file your tax return, call it a true up or like a reconciliation, right? They're going to say, hey, I get it. You made $52,000. You should have paid us $6,000. You only paid us $5,200 throughout the year. Therefore, you owe us an additional $800 now. That's if your actual amount is your actual amount is greater than the withheld, and you owe taxes. If your actual amount, let's say in that same example, $52,000, it was actually only $4,000 you're supposed to pay, but they withheld $5,200. You would get that $1,200 difference as a refund. The system in itself is set up to provide for refunds, in its very generic, basic sense, right? So adding any complexity to that, it makes the system not work out perfectly. And a good example of that is non-residents, right? The system isn't really set up because residents of the United States get what's called the standard deduction. So essentially, their first almost $14,000 is tax-free. And the way the system is set up is to understand and know that. Well, most non-residents, unless you're from a foreign student from India, you don't get the standard deduction, right? So if we don't have a tax treaty with your country, then the first dollar you earned is taxed. The way the system is set up, it doesn't know that, right? So it's thinking your first 14,000 is tax-free when it may not be, right? So that system is set up as a very generic setup for a very basic resident taxpayer. With that, because of the technical, complex, exception rules-based approach of the US tax system, comparing refunds can be very folly because they depend on a lot of functions like your income. How much did you have withheld? What are your deductions, right? And in the case of non-residents, German students get $9,000 tax-free. Chinese students only get $5,000 tax-free, right? So there's so many, and if you're from Taiwan, well, yeah, some people think that's part of China, some people don't. Well, in the US tax system, it's not part of China, right? Taiwan is its own, and there is no tax treaty the US has with Taiwan, right? So therefore, anyone that's coming from Taiwan as a foreign student, every dollar is taxed, right? So I ask, if you're comparing refunds with your friends, it's difficult, right? And it's not something that necessarily we can answer without having both tax returns up in front of us. Now, can you compare year over year with yourself? Yes, that's a little easier, right? Because if you're a student from India, foreign student from India, and you're still a foreign student, non-resident from India, and you had the same job as last year, then yeah, your refunds probably are similar if you're making the same amount of money, right? But once again, it can be very, very tricky. Another federal tax, it's taxed at it's a federally levied tax, but it's not income tax. It's called employment tax, and that's Social Security and Medicare. Foreign students and foreign scholars are not generally subject to these. However, if you perform work outside of what's permitted on your treaty, then you would be subject to employment tax. Income tax treaty benefits do not typically extend to these employment taxes, right? So if you're an international student scholar and you're doing work in line with your treaty, then you shouldn't have to have Social Security and Medicare tax withheld from your check. I may have this later too. You can fill out Form 8233 when you're with your HR, and I'm sure that Rourke has said that, or some at UCSD dealing with international students, to fill that out, because that will help those taxes not be collected from your check, because you don't have to have them collected. If they are collected, the way to get a refund is to go back to your employer and ask for it, or to file a completely different form with the IRS that's not part of your tax return to get those employment taxes back. When you send that form in, I like to call it the hope and pray method. You hope and pray they get it, and you hope and pray that you get your money back, because there's nowhere to check the status. Like your income tax return, you can go to where's my refund and type it in and go, okay, it's just going to get direct deposited 2 weeks from now, right? With the Form 843, which is the form you filed to get your employment taxes back, there's no such thing, right? So the whole goal is to not have them withheld at all. So for federal income tax, and this is also true at the state level as well, but the US applies both a source-based and a resident-based approach to income taxation. Source-based is, hey, if that income is earned in the US, it's largely taxed by the US. Resident-based is if you're a US tax resident, then all of your income is taxable regardless of the source. So, right, regardless of where you earn that income, if you're a US tax resident, that income is now subject to tax on the federal income level unless it's specifically excluded, right? We won't get into all those potential exclusions. But the important takeaway here, a non-resident can still be taxed in the US on US sourced income, right? So if you're here as a F1 foreign student or a J1 scholar, and you're working at the university, that will be considered US sourced income. Therefore, you could potentially have to pay US federal and potentially California state income tax on that income you're earning at the university, unless your country has a treaty with the US that exempts that income from being taxable. So the issue of status as a resident alien or a non-resident alien is key in determining an individual's US income tax liability, right? Because residents, you get taxed on worldwide income regardless of where earned. Non-residents only get taxed on US sourced income. These are some of the examples of what could be subject to US income tax for a non-resident. So why this is important: if you're a resident alien or permanent resident or a US citizen, you fall under the US resident tax system. And if you're a non-resident alien, then you fall under the non-resident alien tax system. Tax brackets are all the same. It just determines on what is included as income, what is your treaty, and potentially what are the deductions you're allowed to have. Who is a resident? So any US citizen is going to be a resident of the for tax purposes. A green card holder, and then anyone meeting the substantial presence test, right? And so that substantial presence test is really, really important for non-residents, kind of. So testing for residency status, this is a test based on a number of days present in the US to determine if you're a tax resident. That's the substantial presence test, right? There's a formula, right? If you've been here for X number of days, then you're considered a resident for tax purposes. The big kicker here is foreign students and foreign researchers may be exempt from having to count those days. Therefore, if those days don't count and those days are excluded, then therefore you wouldn't meet the substantial presence test, so you would be deemed a non-resident. So definitions of what a student is and what a scholar, researcher, and teacher is, right? So we typically see an F1 or a J1 student. I would say F1 is more common. And then for a scholar or a J1, they call it a J1 non-student, right? So that's a J1 scholar. And it talks about what that means. So if like you're a TA, a teaching assistant, you're a student, but then you also pick up a job as a TA, right? You would still be an F1 student. So how do I know if I'm a non-resident alien? So this is that substantial presence test. So here's the formula, right? Two parts, right? It's, were you in the US for at least 31 days in the current year and at least 183 days during the 3-year period based on the formula, right? So current year, so 2023, every day counts as a day. In 2022, every 3 days counts as a day. And then 2021, every 6 days counts as a day. Right, and if you add all that number up from that formula and it's greater than 183 or equal to 183, and you've also been in the US for 31 days in 2023, then you would be considered a resident alien. Exception to that is if you're an exempt individual. And in this audience today, I see there's 74 participants, right? Rourke, myself, maybe a couple other from UCSD, so maybe 70 people that are really worried about this. You may be exempt from taking this test, right? Because your days don't actually count yet because of your status, your visa status, and how long you've been in the US. So exception to days present, it does not include regular commuters from Mexico. It also does not include days in transit, days that medical conditions prevent departure, and the most important, it does not include days for certain teachers, trainees, and students. So when we look at testing for residency status for students, right, there's two big questions. If you Google IRS publication 4011, it has a pretty good chart as well. It's actually like 5 questions. One of those is, are you in compliance with your visa? And I'm going to assume that answer is yes, because you're still here, right? So that's my assumption. So the two big questions that we ask from a standpoint of, are you an exempt individual and can we assume you're a non-resident without even thinking about the number of days you've been here, is first, are you temporarily in the US as a student on an FJ MRQ visa? I've been doing this for a while. I've never seen someone on an MRQ visa. I've seen F and J. So F1, we typically say student, and J1, we typically say scholar. However, it does also exist for a student to be on a J1 visa, right? So that's why, are you a student on an FJ NRAQ visa? And then the next question, have you been in the US for no more than 5 calendar years with the understanding that any one day during the year counts as a year? And when we're asking that question, we're asking that question under the assumption, on an F or J visa, have you been here? So if you came on like a B1 or B2 tourist visa, then we don't count that, right? That's you coming here to enjoy, to have vacation, whatever that is, right? So we're thinking of that 5 calendar years, we're talking about F or J visa. Essentially, if you came to the US on an F or J visa as a student in 2018 and you haven't left, then you're likely a resident for 2023, right? Because your 5 years would be 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. So those are your years in which you can count your days as exempt, right? So 2023, you would have to use the test, right? If you've been here every day in 2023, then obviously you would pass this test in a sense that you would be a resident alien. Right, so the important year there for students is essentially if you've been here since 2018 and haven't left, then you're probably going to be a resident for 2023. Of note, if you were here from 2011 to 2014 and then came back in 2022, that 2011 to 2014, that would count as your 4 of your 5 years, right? So it's not like a continuous period. It's in your lifetime, have you come on an FJ NRAQ visa for more than 5 calendar years, and that would count as like if your parents came here as an F1 student back in the day and you came as an F2 dependent with them, that would count as one of your years, right? If you were here for a year. If your parents are here for 4 years with you and you're an F2, that would count for 4 of your 5 years as well, right? So that's where it can get rather tricky. If you answer yes to both of these questions, then you're exempt. Right, and as a reminder, I said this in the beginning, 2024 does not yet count, right? We're analyzing your 2023 tax status. And I know Rourke is monitoring the chat, so he can answer probably a lot of the questions, and then I can answer questions kind of the end of the presentation. I'm not going to monitor. I see the chat up there, but I'm not going to monitor it as I'm speaking. So going to the testing for residency status for scholars now, right? So kind of there's once again a couple additional questions in publication 4011, but the 2 important ones that we ask is, are you temporarily in the US as a teacher or trainee on a J visa and also not a full-time student, right? And then the second question, have you been in the US for no more than any part of 2 of the preceding 6 years? So essentially, I call it a 3 and 7 test. If 2023 is your 3rd year here in the last 7, then you likely will fail being an exempt individual, and 2023 days would count towards the substantial presence test for you. But in that 6-year period, 2017 to 2022, if you've only been here for 1 year, then 2023, you would still be exempt. Right, but if you've been here for 2 of those years that listed on the screen, and then you're also here in 2023, then you would no longer be exempt. So here's the different visas highlighted FJ NRAQ. Like I said, I've never seen someone come into VITA or even when anyone ask me a question about an NRAQ visa. So I like to call those probably unicorns. People tell me they exist, but I've never seen them. So F or J is what we typically see. So are you an exempt individual? This was that chart I was telling you about. This is from IRS publication 4011. On the left is students, on the right is teacher or trainee, right? There's like 5 questions there, but the 2 important ones to us are the 2 that we already discussed for students and the 2 that we discussed for teacher or trainee. So exception exempt individuals, right? So if you answered yes as a student or as a scholar to those previous 2 questions, then you're an exempt individual. That means you're exempt from counting days for the substantial presence test. that does not necessarily mean you're exempt from paying federal income tax, right? That's a very important distinction that I want to make. We have here F or J students exempt from counting days for first 5 calendar years, and then J non-students, I should say 2 out of the preceding 6 years for J non-students. And that would be if you were here as like an F1 student and then you convert it to a J1 scholar, those years would count against you as well when we think about applying the substantial presence test. So an example, because examples help really drive the point home, you can see it kind of in practice, right? So we have an F1 student arrived in the US December 30 of 2019. The student was physically present in the US every semester since arriving, but did leave the US for 2 months during each summer, right? So they're an F1 student. We're going to count their first 5 years as exempt, right? So 2019, although that person was only here for 2 days, counts as year number 1. 2020 counts as year number 2. 2021 counts as year number 3. 2022 counts as year number 4. And 2023 counts as year number 5, right? So those first 5 years, those days are exempt, which is why we see 0 days over here for these 3 years. Were they present? Yes, but we don't put a number here because those days are exempt days for the test, right? So this person, they don't meet the substantial presence test because they have exempt days. Therefore, no questions. They are a non-resident alien for U.S. income tax purposes. Now we have another one. We have an F1 or J1 student. So F1 student arrived in the U.S. August 1st of 2022. But hey, they were also here as an undergrad from 2015 through 2018. They did leave. They're still here since 2022, but they did leave for 60 days during the summer of 2023. So when we look at that, we have to look at those previous 4 years they were here. That's their first 4 years of exempt days. And then 2022 would be year 5 of exempt days. Therefore, for 2022, we still have 0 days, right? Because those days are exempt. However, 2023 is now their 6th year. Therefore, they're no longer exempt from counting days for the substantial presence test. And so every day counts day for day, 365 days in 2023. They were out of the country for 60 days. Therefore, they were present in the US for 305 days, which is at least 31 days in the current year. And the total is at least 183 days. Therefore, this example student would be considered a resident alien for tax purposes. Now we have a J1 scholar. They arrived August 29, 2021. So 2021 and 2022 would be their exempt years. 2023, they're no longer exempt. They meet the substantial presence test. Therefore, they would be a resident alien for tax purposes. So now we got a J1 scholar. They were in the US from August 2018 to June 2022 as a student. They returned to US on August 2023 as a J1 scholar. So their 2 years of exemption would be 2018 and 2019. Therefore, every day they've been here since 2020 would count as a day towards the substantial presence test, but the test only looks at current year and the previous 2 years using the formula there. Their total, they were here for at least 31 days in 2023, and then their total based on the formula is 259 days, which is greater than 183. Therefore, they'd be a resident alien for tax purposes. And so lastly, we got example number 5. So August, also a J1 scholar, August 2017 until May of 2018 as a scholar. They returned to the US in August 2023 as a scholar, right? So their first 2 years of exemption are 17 and 18. They weren't here 19 through 22. So 2023 is not an exempt year. So we got to count every day, right? So it's 138 days from August 15th to the end of the year. That is at least 31 days in the current year, but they don't meet the total of 183 days based on the formula. Therefore, they don't meet both parts of the substantial presence test. So they are considered a non-resident alien for tax purposes for 2023, right? They no longer have exempt days, but they didn't So those days count, but they didn't have enough days to meet the substantial presence test. So exempt individuals, the benefit is you can exclude the day's presence for the substantial presence test. You're much less likely to trigger tax resident alien status. Of note, each year that you're here and you want to claim those days to be excluded, you must complete Form 8843. If you have a job where you have income and you have a W-2 and you fill out Form 1040 NR, if you come to VITA or you're doing a Glacier Tax or Sprint Tax, then 8843 is kind of included in your tax return that you file, right? The Form 1040 NR will include items that also include the 8843. If you don't have a job and have no other reason to file a tax return, then you can file 8843, which is an information return on its own, and you should do that. If you email vitasdsu@gmail.com and you're 8843 only, I can give you instructions on how you can fill that out and where you mail it to. And I always get the question, I've been here for 3 years, I've never done an 8843. Should I do one? Go ahead. Do one for all 3 years you've been here. Just make sure you use the right form. You got to go back into the IRS archive to pull out the 2022 and 2021 form, right? Because it changes the dates, the years change every year for that form, right? So you could do that. I recommend that if you do that and you mail it, I would make a copy before I mail it so you have it for your records. Once again, exempt individuals are still liable for income taxes. The exemption is from the test for days, not exemption from U.S. tax. So we just talked about the Form 8843. The family members also must file this form if they're present in the U.S. under an F or J status in 2023, regardless of whether any U.S. income was received. Of note, each family member must fill one of these out, right? It's not like a family form that you can fill out. So if you're here with your spouse and 2 kids, then in theory, you would have 4 different Form 8843s, right? One for each of the persons that's here on an F or J visa. And so if you had to file, but your spouse and kids did not, then you would file Form 1040 NR and include 8843 with that filing. And then separately, you would fill out 3 different Form 8843s for your other dependents and mail them to the IRS. Here's a link to get the most current Form 8843. If you go to the IRS website, you can go to Forms and Publications, and you can look at previous years. You can type 8843 and pull up the older year Form 8843s if that's something you want to do for previous years you've been here. So I am a non-resident alien with taxable income. What do I need to file? So if you are one of these, you need to file Form 1040 NR. You don't need to file this if you have no taxable income and you have no other reasons to file, such as you had wages or scholarship income exempt by a tax treaty, or you had a taxable scholarship or income tax was withheld, right? So if you don't have any of those and you don't have a job, then you're 8843 only. But if those apply to you, then you do have to file Form 1040 NR and the associated schedules that go along with that. So the overview of U.S. taxable income for non-residents aliens would be wages received in 2023, subtracting that amount exempted by a tax treaty if it exists, adding any other taxable income in the U.S., minus certain deductions such as student loan interest on U.S. loans, equals your adjusted gross income. You would then subtract either the itemized deductions, which for most people not from India is going to be the state income tax that you paid to California. If you're an Indian student or scholar, that is the standard deduction that those from India get to take advantage of. So adjusted gross income minus those deductions equal taxable income, and then you apply that to the tax bracket to get how much tax you owe. And then you look at your withholding and you determine whether you have a tax amount due or if you're receiving a refund from the federal government. So for treaties, there's different treatments for students and teachers and researchers and different types of income, right? Most permit a certain amount of income to be treated as exempt from income tax, but every treaty the U.S. has with other countries is different. You can look at treaties online at the IRS website using that link. And you can focus on the different articles related to teachers, professors, and researchers for those that are scholars, or the articles on students for those that are students. IRS Publication 901, that's another IRS publication, provides a summary of treaty provisions specific to scholars and students. So it kind of summarizes those tax treaties that are much more in-depth. A student or scholar must have been a resident of the treaty country prior to entering the U.S. for the provisions of that treaty to apply. The key factor is the residency and not the citizenship of the individual. In most cases, which we see almost all the time, the person will be both a citizen and a resident of the same treaty country. However, it's very important to determine the country of residency to apply the proper treaty benefits. Let's say you're a student from China and you went to the UK for 7 years to study. You likely became some sort of tax resident to the UK during that time, and then you came directly to the United States. Well, then we would have to apply the UK tax treaties for you, not the Chinese tax treaties, is what this is kind of saying. In common treaty terms, there's different income exclusions amounts, and they'll vary by student and scholar. There's also different lengths of time. Some treaties only apply for 2 years, some for 5 years, some unlimited. Later in here, we'll get a couple of those different, I guess, unique treaties that don't follow kind of what most others, the general rules that most others follow. Some countries have what we call retro treaties, and these are some unique treaties. One of those is German students. So if you're a student from Germany, you're entitled to a $9,000 exemption while in a student status, but only for your first 4 years. If you happen to stay longer than 4 years, then you lose that treaty exemption for all 4 other years that you used to be exempt, right? So very important to know how long you're going to be here, because if you know that you're going to be here longer than 4 years, then you just, when you file your tax return in those first 4 years, you just don't claim the exemption from the treaty, right? And then you don't have to worry about paying it back later. Same thing for scholars from India, UK, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. After 2 years, if you stay longer, then you lose the treaty benefits you enjoyed for those first 2 years. Some others, Professor Gill is another professor at San Diego State. Him and I kind of work on this, and he added this in because he has better humor than I do. Canada's weird. We're talking about the treaty, not the country. We don't think Canada as a country is a weird country. So if one of these retro treaties do apply to you, then we require a taxpayer to file amended returns and pay tax on that previous year's income that's no longer exempt. Once again, you can go to IRS Publication 901 and read the section or country that applies to you for non-students and students. Reporting treaty income. So each type of income that an alien can earn is identified by a numeric code on Form 1042S Box 1. International students and scholars receive Form 1042S in lieu of a Form W-2 for any income that is covered by a treaty, and also sometimes income received that is not covered by a treaty. We see this if a university pays you a scholarship for room and board, but your country doesn't have a treaty to exempt that, that income will be reported as Code 16 on 1042S and say, hey, this income is not exempt. Therefore, you'll have federal tax withheld as an estimate, and then we'll report that income will be reported as, that scholarship income will be reported as income on your tax return. The most common codes we see are code 16, 19, and 20. 16 is for scholarship or fellowship grants that are not used for tuition. 19 is compensation for teaching or researching. And then 20 is compensation during studying or training. That's the one we most commonly see for F1 students that go have an internship somewhere or work on campus, right? That's going to be considered code 20 income. So in IRS Publication 4011, they list all the countries that the U.S. has treaty benefits with. And there's 3 different tables, one for code 16, one for code 19, and one for code 20. These slides just show a snapshot of that. But if you're looking at this publication, please be sure that you're looking at the correct income code table for what you're trying to reference. So this is what a 1042S looks like. It generally reports treaty exempt income, but not always. I mentioned a second ago, sometimes this will include taxable scholarships that you receive for room and board if your country doesn't have a treaty with the US to exempt that income. One other one we see relatively often is if you open up a bank account with like US Bank or Chase Bank and they offer you a bonus for opening it at $100 or $200, they typically report this on a 1042-S, and it comes with income code 29. So the 1042-S from UCSD is prepared by UCSD, and you see code 16, 19, and 20. Not everyone is going to get a 1042-S, right? So if you don't get one, that doesn't mean you're going to, but you can confirm kind of with UCSD as if you're supposed to, right? This is a form that is issued to you, not a form that you prepare yourself, right? So we've had people come to VITA and prepare their own 1042-S. Right, it's like, that's not really how this works. This is something like a W-2. Those are tax documents that are issued to you for use in preparing your tax return, but not for you to create on your own. So if you work on or off campus for students, this is typically income code 20. If a student earns more wages than their tax treaty benefit allows, the excess must be reported on their tax return. So working off campus, sometimes students and scholars try to make use of treaty benefits for dependent. So if your work off campus is related to your studying or your training or degree plan, such as like you're a computer engineer and you get a job at Amazon for an internship to do that, then that would still be considered code 20, right? It's work related to why you're here and why you are here in the US. If you do something that is not related to your studies here in the US, then that would be considered code 17 or code 18 if it's off campus. So looking at a Form W-2 and a Form 1042-S, right, what we see sometimes, and this will indicate to me as a tax professional that if I see a W-2 from someone that has $9,000 in box 1 and has $10,000 in box 16, box 1 and box 16 are not the same, then I'm looking for a 1042-S. Because what this is telling me is we have a treaty with this country they're from for $1,000, right? And so that's what I should see a 1042-S for, right? Because while the federal government has a treaty with your country to exempt that income, the California state likely does not, right? So that income is exempt federally, but not exempt by the state. So if I see these are the same, I'm not expecting a 1042-S. If I see that they're different, then I probably would expect a 1042-S. And just because, let's say they were the same, and you still have a treaty exemption, but for some reason the paperwork wasn't filled out properly, and you didn't get a 1042-S, that treaty exemption can still be applied on your tax return, right? So in this example, let's say that box 1 said 10,000 and box 16 said 10,000, but you did have a $1,000 exemption. We can put on your tax return, hey, report at 10,000. Of note, 1,000 of that is treaty exempt income, so you would only pay tax on $9,000, right? So even if you don't, the 1042-S is the proper way. We like that way better. But if you have a treaty exemption and you didn't receive a 1042-S, we can still apply the treaty to the treaty exemption to your tax return, right? It's not like you didn't get one, so you can't take advantage of it. Some outside employers will not handle your taxes correctly. Common mistakes, no 1042-S, right? We talked about a second ago. You'll have to apply the treaty when you prepare your tax return. And they also might apply employment taxes, right? So you are exempt from employment taxes, so they shouldn't do that. So just as a frame of reference for you, when you're talking to HR, they may not understand this, right? This is your situation is relatively uncommon to the stereotypical human resources payroll person, right? Especially on an off-campus job. at UCSD, right, they deal with this a lot because they have a foreign student community, right, and a foreign scholar community, so they can handle these situations a lot better. But if you're a foreign student going to get an internship at a random company with a small HR team, they've probably never seen this in practice, and it doesn't make sense to them. And I'll tell you, 10 years ago, it didn't make sense to me, right? So I can understand why it wouldn't make sense to them, right? So sometimes it's on you to go, hey, I don't have to pay Social Security and Medicare because I'm here on an F1 or J1 visa. And you can potentially fill out the form 8233 and provide that to them. And hopefully that allows them to not withhold the employment taxes. Because once again, much easier upfront to not have them withheld than to try to get them back later. Dealing with a 1099 miscellaneous or 1099 NEC. So we'll talk about non-residents here. So if you receive one of these, and they're more so the 1099 NECs now, they've kind of shifted away from putting non-employee compensation on a 1099 miscellaneous. This essentially means you were a business, right? And we see this sometimes where a company it's easier to bring you on as an independent contractor than it is to hire you as an employee, right? So they give you a 1099 NEC. Probably not the right move, but that's what they did, right? Essentially, that means you're a business, but you're still exempt from self-employment tax. So if you get it on a 1099 miscellaneous, you can report it as other income. It's easy. If you get it on a 1099 NEC, you typically report it on what's called a Schedule C. However, you can also report it as other income as well. Since you remain exempt from self-employment tax, it doesn't really matter. So here are the two potential steps to get back Social Security and Medicare or employment taxes that were withheld from your paycheck. I mentioned there, you can email the VITA email. I have some draft email that I can send to you with that form kind of filled out with instructions on where you should put certain items and then mail it to the Internal Revenue Service Center in Austin, Texas is where that one's at. So other forms you may have received, 1099 INT, you can probably disregard that because interest received on deposits held in U.S. banks are not taxable if you're a non-resident. Some may get that 1042-S for opening a new account, income code 29. We can report that, but that won't make it taxable income. That just reports tax exempt income in this case. Form 1098-T, that's your tuition statement. We typically disregard those because educational credits are not allowed for a non-resident alien. And then if you do have taxable scholarships, your university should have issued you a 1042-S with an exemption code of 00, which says, hey, this is scholarships for room and board not used for tuition, and it's not exempt based on the tax treaty with that country. Others, 1099 div and 1099B for broker statements, right? If you are investing in a U.S. stock market and receiving dividends on U.S. stocks and capital gains on U.S. stocks, then that would be reportable income to the U.S. Some unique treaties. So Indian students on an FJ or M visa are allowed to use the standard deduction instead of itemizing deductions. An Indian student may take a standard deduction equal to the amount allowable on Form 1040. That's $13,850 for single, right? Indian foreign scholars don't need to worry about this because they're typically when they're here in the first 2 years as a researcher or a trainee, their full amount that they make is exempt based on treaty. But for Indian students, you get to take standard deduction, so your first almost $14,000 is tax-free. So for another unique treaty from China, a student from China is entitled to the $5,000 exemption each year for time reasonably necessary to complete education or training, right? So essentially, as long as you're still here as a student, we call that time reasonably necessary to complete education or training. So here you may be here on year 6, right? And you're no longer a foreign non-resident foreign student. You now have to file a resident tax return. We can still apply the $5,000 treaty exemption on your income, even as a resident. Similarly, for scholars from China, after 2 years, you become a resident, but you get 1 more year of tax benefits under the treaty, right? So that 3rd year, you're a resident, but you still get to take advantage of the tax treaty benefits for a J1 scholar from China. So when we see withholding, once again, these are estimates. These are amounts that are withheld from your paycheck to help pay for what your tax liability may be at the end of the year, right? You may pay this stuff all year and still owe a little bit more at the end of the year, right? And that's because these are estimates. These aren't perfect science, right? So the typically two forms that we see withholding, just so you're aware, on 1042S, it's box 7A, federal tax withheld. And on the W-2, it's box 2, federal income tax withheld. Right, so that's the amount of federal tax, income tax that was withheld from your earnings. So deductions for most foreign students, for most non-resident students and scholars, except for students from India, we look to take the itemized deductions. That's typically going to be, for most people, the state and local taxes that you paid. And then potentially any charitable contributions to U.S. charities only, any student loan interest on U.S. originated loans, and then any casualty or theft losses if it was related to a federally declared disaster area. Once again, the one we commonly see is going to be your state and local taxes. So dependents and exemptions, U.S. income tax provides a blanket deductions against taxable income. The standard deduction is generally almost $14,000 for a single taxpayer and $27,700 for a married filing jointly taxpayer. This is not applicable to non-residents except for students from India. All unmarried non-residents must use the single filing status, and married non-residents must use the married non-resident or married filing separately status, even if their spouse is present in the U.S. Of note, a non-resident alien who is married to a U.S. citizen or U.S. resident or U.S. resident alien can choose to be treated as a resident and file a joint return with their resident spouse. So there are some exceptions that allow dependents to be added to your tax return. Here are kind of those exceptions there. Right? If these apply to you, then you're likely not going to qualify for any free tax support, right? You're going to have to go pay a tax professional that understands non-residents, specifically dependency associated with non-residents, right? If you come to VITA with this situation, it's just not something that we can train in the time we have to train our student volunteers and the breadth of information we have to train them. This is not a situation we see very often, so we don't train our student volunteers to do this. For married to a U.S. resident, typically as a non-resident, you don't get to qualify for many credits on the U.S. tax system that are available to residents, right? But if you are married to a U.S. resident, you can choose to be treated as a resident as well. So we can also have dual status residents. So here's an example where Marco came to the U.S. as a scholar on August 1, 2022 and 2023. Subject to the substantial presence test, are not subject to that test for 2022 and 2023. But looks like he'll be in the U.S. long enough in 2024 to fail the presence test, therefore be treated as a resident. He may elect to be treated as a resident for part of 2024. So he'd be like a part-year resident in 2024. Very complicated situation there. Once again, if this applies to you, it's not something that SDSU VITA can handle. So if you become a resident in 2023, but your spouse is not, once again, you can both file jointly as residents. So this, once again, if you're a resident, that means you get taxed on your worldwide income. So this might make sense if that non-resident spouse has no income, right, from that foreign country. Otherwise, it would have to be included as U.S. sourced or U.S. income to the federal tax system. So treaty exclusion does not match up with the exemption from the substantial presence test. So here's an example of timing issues. Anwar came to the U.S. on F1 on August 1, 2018. He's exempt from counting days, 2018 through 2022, but not 2023. He's a resident for tax purposes for 2023 tax year. However, his treaty does run, that should say August 1, 2018 to July 31, 2023. So even though a resident for 2023 for tax purposes, he could still have treaty excluded income from those first 7 months of 2023.
Doug, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I just ask, what would you
Yes.
suggest if they're a resident still able to claim treaty benefits? What would you advise regarding any software like TurboTax?
Yeah, you could try TurboTax. Typically, what we do, like for a student from China that becomes a resident, I will typically go into the other income section of tax layer. As an example, we use it VITA, and I will put in treaty China treaty income or China treaty exemption and put a negative 5,000 to essentially back out that $5,000 that is exempt for like a Chinese student. That's how I typically do it, because there's not a specific part on a resident tax return that says, hey, here's the line if you still have treaty exempt income. So we kind of have to just kind of force it through the system. That's how we typically force it.
Great, thank you.
So the next probably 20 or so slides is Glacier Tax Prep. So I'm not going to go through these slides, right? They're kind of like really for your information of like each different screen and kind of how that works. Right. So I would once again not cover all of these, but something you can look at on your own. If Glacier Prep cannot handle your tax situation, if you're a student, you can book an appointment with SCSU VITA if available. We do a lot of student returns, foreign student returns. We don't do a lot of foreign scholar returns, right? So our volunteers are much more adept to foreign student tax returns, but we do some foreign scholar returns as well, right? But if you come and we just can't handle your situation, typically if you do make an appointment and you think you have a very unique situation, trying to reach out to me ahead of time so I can kind of make that determination prior to the Saturday of your appointment. Otherwise, you'll need to have a paid tax preparer that understands your situation a lot better, which there aren't many, because while everyone in this room, right, foreign student, foreign scholars applies, the understanding applies to 100% of the people in this room. It's a very small percentage of those that file tax returns, right? That's why you can't do your return on TurboTax, right? Because TurboTax is not going to invest the money to develop the software to allow for that, because it's not going to make them any money, because it's not a very common thing, right? And I know that's kind of crappy to say, but that's capitalism, right? If it's not going to make a company money, they're probably not going to do it. So I'm going to skip through. So paid preparers, most trained is going to be a CPA or an EA. I'm actually an EA, not a CPA. A certified public accountant, right? They are trained, very well trained in all areas of accounting, whereas an enrolled agent is trained specifically on tax issues, federal tax at that, and honestly not really foreign student federal tax, right? It's more, the EA exam is more resident tax system, right? So you got to really find someone with specialized training in those situations. The least trained, we say H&R Block, Liberty Tax, or any of those kind of big box stores, right, that can prepare your tax return. They have paid employees similar to our volunteers, right, where they may not necessarily have a license to prepare tax returns, but they go through a training, right? And someone in H&R Block is going to have their license, right? But maybe one or two people, kind of the supervisors in the back, but those people are preparing a return don't, right? And you may get really lucky and get Johnny that's been working at a temporary job for H&R Block for 20 years. Or you may get Jimmy, who's like down and out on his luck and found this temporary job, and it's his first year ever preparing a tax return, right? So that's the kind of experience that you get with like an H&R Block or a Liberty Tax. Once again, don't try with TurboTax. They can't handle non-residents. And I know people always ask me this. I don't have a list of preferred providers just because it's not something a lot of people do. Maybe one day I can spend the research and time to figure out some preferred providers, but there aren't many. So now we'll skip through the kind of the Glacier Tax stuff here. So for Glacier Tax, they'll print off the forms. You must sign and date and send to the address indicated in your instructions. You'll probably have the form 1040 NR. 1040 NR EZ it's not really used anymore. Schedule OI will probably also be there. And then form 8843. If you need a taxpayer ID, like you don't have a social security number or an individual taxpayer ID number, then it will also include a form W7 to send in with your tax return as well. Make sure you keep a copy for yourself. Where when to file on Glacier Tax, it looks like you can't e-file or fax the forms. If you do happen to get an appointment with SDSU VITA or a paid preparer, then we typically can e-file your non-resident tax return, so you don't have to mail them. Due date April 15th of 2024. I do believe there's been a 2-month extension to file and pay in San Diego County due to the weather we had a couple months ago. So that due date may be June 15th now. But really, you should strive and aim to have this done by April 15th. Here are some of the resources we talked about today. And then lastly, I will open it up to questions in just a minute. For SDSU VITA, we only have 3 days remaining for tax preparation. We're only open on Saturdays. And we're open from 10:30 to 3:30. And the 3 dates remaining are 16 March, 23 March, and 13 April. Like I said, I will open up the remaining appointments after this today, but they'll probably fill up pretty quickly. You have inside information because you know they're happening today, but I get probably 5 to 10 emails every day with people asking me, hey, can you open up more appointments, right? So they'll probably get taken pretty quick as well. One thing I've done and I'm willing to do is we're going to have kind of we meet. All the returns we do are prepared virtually, right? So we have a Zoom meeting for the actual day for the tax preparation. One big Zoom meeting where we have breakout rooms. What we're going to do as well is have another meeting created where we have what's called a wait list, right? So you can join this room, kind of have to stay there. So it could be a whole waste of your day. But if we have someone that doesn't show or someone that comes and we can't prepare the return, we're going to do a wait list. We're going to pull from the wait list room based on when you got to that wait list room. And you can't really leave, right? Because you leave and come back, you're losing your spot, right? So it could be a complete waste of your time. We may never get to your return, but it was my way of attempting to accommodate more people, right? And it's not convenient. I understand that. That you may sit there for 5 hours and not get your tax return prepared. And you may do that for the last 3 days we're open and not get your tax return prepared. I'm sorry, it's unfortunate, but I am dealing with the limitations that we have from a bandwidth perspective. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and open up to any questions. So if you have a question, I ask that you please raise your hand. That'll probably be the most efficient way to do this. I'm not going to be able to answer these questions in the chat, so you can kind of ask them here for those that didn't get answered. Zixin, go ahead.
Hi, I just wonder if I might be clear. So you said that everyone might receive 1042S, but they can still apply for the benefit. Like even if I did not receive 1042, maybe I should, but we can still apply for the benefit on using the Glacier.
What country are you from?
China.
You're from China. Yes, I mean you, right? You're a student, right? A student or a J1 scholar?
Yeah, F1 student, currently non-resident.
F1 student, non-resident. Yeah, you would still, the $5,000 treaty exemption would still apply to you, and should receive a 1042S. But if you did not, then we can still apply.
No, I did
And that's
not.
for, like if you worked on campus, right?
Okay.
$1,000 for like on campus or internship work.
Maybe I didn't receive the form because the wage is too low, like they kind of forget it. I don't know.
No, I mean, it should
Um,
be just, do you go to UCSD? Or where do
yeah,
you go
yeah.
to? Yeah, I mean, Roy, can you comment on that? I assume regardless of what you earned, even if it was $1,000, you would then get a 1042-S for $1,000.
Yes, you should be getting a
Oh,
1042. Zach, you should be getting a 1042-S, but you would only get that if you claimed your treaty benefits during the creation of your Glacier record. So in other words, your
oh,
department would
maybe
have to
last,
sponsor you for
yeah,
a Glacier record. And if our payroll doesn't know that you're an international,
yeah,
then they
last
wouldn't be able
year I
to.
didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you didn't
Oh,
last year,
should I do it now? Like I didn't do it last year.
yeah, so we would apply that. So you would get a W-2, right? And that W-2, your box 1 and box 16 will probably be the same. Let's say it's $2,000. We would then
Yeah, yeah.
apply the treaty for $2,000 the federal side for you. And Glacier should
Should I contact them now?
And for this current year, you should talk to your employing department and let them know that you need a Glacier record, and they should set that up for you. Then you will get an automatic email from Glacier, and then that will prompt you on what documentation to submit to the payroll office.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Shuhan, go ahead.
Yes, hi. So my question is like, I'm also an international student from China, and this is my third year in United States, and I'm not a resident here. And so my question is like, the only income I have is some housing stipend from like the basic needs hub in UC San Diego, and it's like the housing stipend I got is like $660 in total, and it's like when I received like $100 less, so I think like probably that $100 is like some tax is like going to the tax. So I wonder like, because I feel like I probably the most refund I could get is like 100. So then is it possible like I just give up those $100? Like I don't want those $100. Like I feel like it's going to spend me so much time and energy like to like to
That's a good
get
question.
it.
I mean, if you look at when I look at scholarships for China, right? So the treaty we have with China is, hey, your scholarships, regardless of what they're used for, would be tax exempt, right? So if you got a housing stipend, I would assume that's some sort of scholarship or a grant. Therefore, that should not have been taxed. I don't know why it's $100 less, right? I mean, that could be 8 million reasons why. But I would say if it is federal income tax, then I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's probably not worth your time to get it back.
Okay, but then I got it like, hey, that should be my money. Okay, so then okay, I understand it. Yeah, then I will go get my $100 back. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Go ahead, Suma. Suma?
Hi, sorry, I was unable to unmute my PC. So
You're good.
actually, the question I have is one of my friends, he was a J1 scholar, but he's no more like enrolled in the UCSD. He left back to the home country and does not have access to UC Path. So how do they get their W-2?
So Suma, the UC Path portal has a separate portal for former employees. So he can just go onto the UC Path portal, and instead of selecting the UC institution like UC San Diego or UCLA, at the bottom there's a link for former employees.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And the question I have is in my W-2 form, the box 1 and box 16, if box 16 is lesser than box 1, do I still have to worry about 1042S?
Box 16 is less than box 1?
Yeah,
Did you work in 2 different states?
no.
That's interesting. Typically box 16 would only be less than box 1 if there was some California like state exemption, or we see sometimes if you worked in 2 different states, right, your box one would say like 50,000, and then if you worked in California and Washington, right, California would say 10,000 because you earned your other 40,000 in Washington. But I'm
It's
not
not
quite
that
sure.
less, it was like just like $1,000 or some amount.
Yeah, that there could be a couple reasons for that, but probably not a 1042S. We would typically see when box one is less than 16, not the other way around. That could be maybe something that you're receiving in your paycheck, like a pre-tax deduction for state, you know, like a cafe or a 125 plan, something like that, that could be exempt at the state level. So if it's a very small amount, then there's probably something you're getting paid that's taxable federally, but not to the state, some sort of benefit you're receiving.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks for
You're
explaining.
welcome. No problem. You go ahead.
Hi, and I also left my question in the chat box, but I didn't find the answer. So I just want to ask, because I didn't use a payroll tax treaty on the Glacier in 2023 because I was doing my CPT on different UC campuses, and it turns out there's no like 1042 form to issue me for the 2023 through Glacier system. So in that case, can I just file my tax return based on only on my W-2 form, or what else can I do to fix this problem?
So I mean, if you're 1042S, I'm sorry, if you're you saying you believe you should have got, or are you a foreign student from China?
No. So the situation for me is a little bit complicated because I was doing my CPT in another like UC campuses, but I only have the pleasure for the UCSD from this year because I like transferred to different campuses like more than 3, and obviously when I doing my CPT I didn't realize I should register another like pleasure account for that payroll stuff. So I realized there's no like 1042 because I checked some of the information on the IRS website. It says that whenever I receive the payroll from the academic institution, there should be a like 1042 form from that academic institution. So should I just go with my W-2 form, or I don't know.
It's a very difficult question to answer without having your forms right. I don't know what your forms are, right? So are you a foreign student or a foreign scholar?
So former student, no, I'm currently a postdoc.
Are you here as an F1 student or a J1 scholar?
No, I'm a F1 student.
Okay, you're an F1 student from which country?
Taiwan.
From Taiwan,
Yeah.
right? So you likely wouldn't get a 1042S because you have no treaty exempt income,
Oh, okay.
right? Because you're from Taiwan, which from a treaty perspective is not considered China.
Yeah, but things are a little bit tricky because I used to use 1042 to file my tax when I was in other state, because the thing is I became a like F1 postdoc in the beginning of this year, but I was student like doing my part-time CPT in UC campuses, another UC campuses, but also a student from other state. So I used the 1042 to file my tax return for other like state tax return. So I just wondering, so you are saying that 1042 is not necessary for me?
I mean, typically, right, unless you have taxable scholarships, if you had taxable scholarships, income code 16, exemption code 0, that's the only way you'd get a 1042S from Taiwan.
Oh,
right.
okay.
So maybe that's what you had previously prior to being a postdoc. But I can't tell you that. I don't know. Your university would have to help identify whether you should have a 1042S. I mean, I can't.
I
But
see.
does your W-2 box 1 and box 16 say the same things?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the same thing.
Probably don't. And you don't think you had any taxable scholarships?
No.
then you probably don't have a 1042S.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. It can get really complicated, right? Very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
So
Thank you.
cool. You're welcome. Kenson, go ahead.
I have a quick question. The last year is my 6th year in the US, so I think I'm the resident for the resident alien. Since I already over five years with OPT, and for this year, I need to fill the federal tax. My question is, I can get the standard deduction, right? And
can, if
for the
you're-
Chinese tax treat,
Go ahead.
can I get the at the same time for the both?
Yes. You should now if you came in 2018, I assume, right? So 2023 is your 6th year, right? Is
Yeah.
that so you now are a resident for US tax purposes, which means you're allowed to have the standard deduction. And then you're also still allowed the $5,000 treaty exemption for being a foreign student from China.
Oh, so like I can get almost 20,000 for the tax free.
Oh yeah, 18,950.
18. Okay, okay,
That's correct.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nias, go ahead.
Hi, so I'm in Indian resident, and I'm in my first year of masters in UC San Diego. I had some earnings in my last quarter, basically 2023, and I was not charged any taxes because I filled the W-4 exemption, which I shouldn't have filled. But right now, when I have all the documents ready, in my W-2, the first column and 16th column has the same amount. But using the Glacier, when I filed the tax return, there was a deduction added for Indian students, which is 13,000 something, and my income was less than that. So the total taxable income is 0.
Correct.
And it doesn't ask me to pay any taxes.
That sounds right. Yeah. So since you started late, right, you said you earned money in like the 4th quarter of the year, right?
Yes.
And since it was below 13,850, right?
Yes.
You wouldn't have any taxable income. So therefore I'm assuming they also didn't withhold any taxes because it's probably a smaller amount near the end of the year.
Okay.
You're probably not getting a refund, but you probably also don't owe any. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yep.
So I just need to send these forms printed, signed to IRS. That's it, right?
Yeah, and then California, the California one as well.
Okay. I'll attend the session for state, and then I'll have idea for that.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Go
Hey,
ahead.
Doug,
Yeah,
Doug,
sure.
can you speak to the 1095 form that many of our folks might be receiving in the mail?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that's a 1095B or C, right, Rourke?
Yeah.
So essentially the 1095B or C, and Rourke, correct me if I'm wrong, but the university likely covers your health insurance while you're here as a foreign student, right? And that's what you're getting the 1095B, 1095C for. That essentially is saying you have healthcare, right? And from a federal standpoint, we don't care right now if you have healthcare. There's no penalty for not having it, but California still cares, right? So the 1095B or C just proves that you had healthcare, or should prove that you had healthcare. So when you're filling out the California tax return, it asks, did you have healthcare? And if you are covered through the university from being here, then you can answer yes to that question. If you receive what's called a 1095A, that means you, for some reason, went and got coverage through what's called the marketplace. Therefore, there may need to be a reconciliation done on your tax return that can get rather complicated. But if you got 1095B or C, kind of a yes, you had healthcare, and we can disregard that form. That form itself won't be entered into your tax return. You'll just answer a question saying yes, I had healthcare. But if you have a 1095A, then that form will have to be entered on your state tax return, or actually on your federal and state tax return, because you may have to pay some of the 1095A subsidies back to the federal government. But if you didn't get a 1095A, disregard what I said. But if you have 1095A, then you could have some additional tax implications. Does that answer your question, Rourke?
Yep, thank you.
Cool, you're welcome. All right, next, Pooja.
Hi, I also have a question about the 1042S. So I was a postdoc on J1 Scholar from India, and I was a postdoc employee. So technically, I should not be receiving a 1042-S. Is that correct?
Are you a J1 scholar or a J1 student?
J1 research scholar.
So are you a full-time student or you are a like non?
I was a postdoc employee, and it was a J1 research scholar visa.
We're a postdoc, right?
That's a scholar. That's a scholar.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the clarification. So yeah, you should get a 1042-S with income code 19, right? And income code 19 would be the so for Indian scholars, your first 2 years in the US, the amount of money you earn from teaching and research at the university is tax exempt. Therefore, you would get a 1042-S with income code 19 showing that tax exempt income.
Oh, and is it supposed to be received after or on March 15th?
I think
In that case?
can answer
So-
Mark.
Yeah. Our institution sent the forms out virtually on early February. However, for Indians, if you are here for more than 2 years, our Glacier system will not apply treaty benefits because you would not be eligible because of the retroactive clause. So that could be a reason why you did not receive it. If you think you should have received it, another reason could be if you didn't have a Glacier record to begin with, then you wouldn't have received this. I don't know if either of those.
So I joined UCSD 2020, but I was on F1 OPT, and the J1 status kicked in December 2022. So, and I've already completed, and I'm currently an ex-employee. So I received my W-2 already, but I have not received 1042-S. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering how
The W-2, it's because the university didn't apply the treaty benefit, right? So that's why you're getting a W-2 in place of a 1042-S.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, just to kind of I'm still confused. If you are saying I should receive it, but can I access it through UC Path, or will I get it after March 15th?
Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding would be that you wouldn't be eligible for the India treaty benefit because you were here as an F1 student and then changed to J1
Correct.
scholar. So you didn't
Yes,
have the
Yeah.
appropriate.
that's what I'm tracking.
So-
Yeah.
so-
You were here.
Okay, so that's why I was asking you if I should not be eligible to receive a 1042-S at this stage.
Yeah, it sounds like no, right? Obviously, every situation
Okay.
is very unique, right? So your initial question, without knowing any
Sure,
background, was should I receive a 1042-S, right? And the answer, well, you probably should, but yeah, in your case, because you were F1 OPT in 2020, you were a J1 scholar in 2022, and now you're a J1 scholar in 2023. Really, did you apply treaty benefits in 2022? Yeah, did you apply treaty benefits in 2022?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have no. My Glacier record, it says when I was trying to access the GTP software, it said the 1042-S will only show up if I'm eligible and after March 15. So I wasn't sure if I'm not eligible or if it's just not
Gotcha.
showing it.
No, you probably wouldn't be eligible for 2023, and you're not eligible for the treaty benefits in 2023. And you also, since you've now been here for 3 years, you wouldn't be eligible for the treaty benefits in 2022 either.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. George.
Yeah. Hello. Well, thank you very much for the talk. It's been really helpful. Yes, probably some basic questions. I guess we have to use Glacier Tax Prep to produce forms 1040 and NR, right? Do we need to use Glacier Tax Prep for that?
Yes, you would utilize Glacier Tax Prep to prepare a non-resident tax return, which is form 1040 NR. That's correct.
Okay, great.
That's one software you can use to produce the 1040 NR.
And how do I know how much money I owe or I might get refunded? Is that something that it outputs, that Glacier outputs, or?
Yes.
Okay. And in case I owe money, do I need to mail it together with the funds? Like, do I need to mail a check together
Yeah,
with?
yeah. So since Glacier requires you to mail in the tax return, you have to mail in a check along with the tax return and pay by April 15th.
Okay. And in case I get refunded, they will mail me.
I don't know. Do you know where can they set up direct deposit on Glacier?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, so I would say, George, if there's a box where you can put in your bank information, then that means they probably can direct deposit it to your bank account. If there's not a spot where you put in your bank information, then they're probably going to mail you a check.
Okay.
And there is a help or a chat function in GTP, so they would be able to answer that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. And last question. I understood in this talk that I shouldn't be charged for federal medical taxes.
Social Security and Medicare taxes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much for these questions.
You're welcome. Thank you. Tejas.
Hi there. So I had another quick question about the form 1042S. So I'm an F1 student from the UK, and I did an internship last summer, and I didn't receive a 1042S, but I think there might be a tax treaty with the UK. And additionally, on my W-2 form, box 16 and box 1 had the same number.
Yeah.
So should I guess that I don't need to request it, or should I ask them if I need it either way?
Correct. Yeah. So it looks like you get an internship. Is that off-campus internship?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So they almost never issue a 1042S. But looking at Income Code 20 on Publication 4011, the U.S. does not have a tax treaty with the UK.
Okay.
Therefore, all of your income will be taxed, right? And so box 1 and box 16 being the same makes sense in your case.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure I don't need a 1042S.
No, I don't, unless you have taxable scholarships from the university, you wouldn't have a 1042S.
Okay, I don't.
You certainly would not have it for your internship.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Archit.
Hey, hello. I wanted to know about the option of a W-2 in the case where I am on a taxable fellowship. Do I need one?
Who's that taxable fellowship with?
From the university. It's a university fellowship. I'm a first-year Indian PhD student there. And I have received a 1042S, but I've not received a W-2.
Yeah, I would assume that it would be on the 1040. Is the 1042S income code 16?
Yes.
Does it say exemption code 0? It just says income code 16 given amount, and to the right of that has an exemption code 00.
Yes, so for 3A it's 00, for 4A it's 50.
Yeah, so 3A don't, and it's above that should say chapter indicator, and the chapter says 3.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was probably your taxable fellowship, right? So code 16 is scholarship or fellowship. The amount is probably the amount you received, and then the 00 code tells me it's taxable, right? So you would receive a 1042S like you did in place of a W-2, so you wouldn't have a W-2 for the taxable fellowship.
Okay, that's okay. And one more question was, does the taxable fellowship still stand for standard deductions if I'm Indian and it's my first year?
Yeah, so how much was your taxable fellowship?
12K.
Yeah, so 12K would be what we call your gross income. Your standard deduction is almost 14K. So therefore you have no taxable income. And was there federal tax withheld from your taxable fellowship?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so you should, right? If you have no other income, and I'm understanding your situation correctly, your federal refund should be that exact amount that they withheld.
Okay, that sounds great. So I don't need any other documents.
Probably about $1,700 they probably withheld, is my guess.
Yes. Yes, 1,700 was withheld, and I don't need more documents from UCSD to file my taxes now.
No, I don't. Not from what you tell me. I don't think so.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much.
Doug,
Thank you.
Doug,
Yes.
if I can ask a follow-up question for our resident alien students, who might be receiving fellowship, taxable fellowship. Our institution does not withhold, so we don't report that on a 1042-S, but it's still taxable. How would our students report that income to the IRS on their federal return?
Work, would that be on the 1098-T under scholarships or grants?
I would, yeah, I guess that would be the way to do it.
That to me, so if you're a resident, right, then 1098-T comes back into play, right? And if your scholarships is higher than your tuition plus your books, which books aren't shown on 1098-T, right? Then it's assumed that that amount over that is was used for room, board, or food or beer, right? Not for tuition. So therefore that amount will be taxable. So that's how it would be essentially reported, is utilizing the 1098-T to report taxable scholarships or fellowships.
Would the student then append that 1098-T to their return instead of the W-2 or 1042-S, since they don't have this?
Yeah, well, they would utilize, as a resident, you would use TurboTax, so you would have a screen where you enter the 1098-T, right? So then you would be able to, a resident on TurboTax would be able to e-file, therefore they wouldn't have to attach the 1098-T to the return, but it would be embedded in the software when you get to like education credits, because they could potentially take advantage of education credits as well, using the 1098-T.
Great, thank you.
Yes, yeah, that's how they would do it. Katie, go ahead.
Hi, I think I might have answered Google answered my question while I was waiting, but
what do you need me for? We got Google, good.
But
Work on out of here.
Just to be sure, I know that you were talking about, so my box 16 on my W-2 and my box 1 on my W-2, the box 16 is lower than the 1 box.
Okay. Is it by a small amount or a large amount?
By about 1,000.
Okay. Yeah, that once again, it's probably without seeing your W-2, it's probably something that you're receiving that is taxable to federal government, but not taxable to the state.
Taxable to federal, but not state. Yeah. My
Yeah,
guess
like
is
some state exemption.
Yeah, my guess was reimbursing the moving costs, but yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
Okay.
That could be it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of intricacies there, but if it's, you know, 1,000, then I wouldn't be. It would not predicate it. The 1042-S really only comes into play when box 16 is greater than box 1, not the other way around. The other way around just tells me there's probably something you received that is being taxed by federal but not by state.
Cool. And I can I'll just fill those numbers in wherever I'm asked to fill them and not worry about it.
Correct.
Perfect. And then I've got a second slightly more complicated question, which is, if you're a resident for tax purposes, but you only arrived halfway through the year, I believe you would file as dual status to try and avoid paying taxes on income earned from your home country earlier in the year. Do you have any advice on where or how to go about that?
I honestly do not. I don't exist. Yeah, I'm trying to think how the best way, you know, the best way to probably do that is just file a resident return, but include the income from the US and see if there's some sort of box you can check or whatnot to say, hey, I'm a dual resident, right? Or part year resident, right? I'm only a resident of the US since August. Therefore, my January to July home country income shouldn't be included.
Okay, so yeah, it should just be able to file a 1040 or whatever it is, and
1040, and let's say like for some reason you had what country are you from?
UK.
Yeah, so UK. Let's say you made $24,000 from a UK job, and it was $2,000 a month, right? So 10,000, and you're now a resident as of August, right? 10,000 is taxable to the US, and 14,000 isn't. I would try to do something where I would report all 24,000. And then I would try to create like a deduction or other income where I can put in a description and go dual status resident, income earned while in UK while not resident of the US, and then put like a negative 14,000 to back it out. But you're explaining to them why you're backing it out.
Okay, that sounds fun. Okay, great. Thank you for your help.
You're welcome, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sungwoo, go ahead.
Hello. I came to this Zoom meeting a bit late, so you might have explained, but I might have missed. So I already finished my GTP or something, so I already know like which documents that I have to send, but the 1042S or all the other documents are, most of the boxes are already filled. Is there like, do I have to fill rest of the boxes, or can I just like sign on the signature and write down the date?
Sungwoo, I don't understand what your question is, honestly.
Oh, okay.
Sungwoo, do you mean the GTP? You finished putting in your information in GTP and it has printed out your 1040 NR and your 8843, and there's some boxes on the 1040 NR that are empty?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Doug, I think he's just asking, does every single box on the 1040 NR filled out?
No, and more commonly than not, most are not, right? I mean, there's probably 20 line items on the first page of the 1040 NR, and you might have 5 of them filled in based on your situation. So yeah, that's common to have many of them blank. So you would not fill anything in there. The software is filled in what it needs to.
Okay, so then like there is like, oh, sign here your signature, like and date. Like, do I have to fill that, and like phone numbers and things like that?
You would sign and date it, that's correct.
Okay, so that's the only like box I have to fill, like, and I can just like send this.
Yes, I mean, the Glacier has prepared the return for you. You should just sign and date it and mail it.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Zixing, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to be clear. Since last year, I didn't mail my tax to IRS properly, or I didn't report like treaty benefits. So this year I did not receive 1042S. Maybe next year, because this year I claimed benefit of US-China treaty. So next year I might receive 1042S. Am I right?
So I would say reporting your tax treaty benefits to the IRS is not going to dictate a 1042S, right? The 1042S is kind of it's a at the source document, right? So that's something, if you are supposed to receive a 1042S from UCSD, that's something you have to work out with UCSD, not the IRS.
Sure. So should I ask UCSD which department, like if I should receive the form? Because when I do Glacier, I did not add the form, or I did not see the form from email.
Zixing, what is the source of your funding? Are you on a fellowship or are you earning wages?
Like I receive my grader wages.
Okay,
and most of my funding are from parents.
But if you're getting your payment from UCSD, if it's wages, if you're working for it, then you would have a Glacier record through the payroll office. If it's fellowship, you'd have a Glacier record through the disbursements office. So I'm trying to determine what kind of payment you're receiving. So if you're working a job and getting wages, your employing department needs to set you up for a Glacier record with the payroll system. So you should talk to whatever department administrator started you working in that job. You should talk to them and ask them to set you up with a Glacier record. And then once they set you up, then all this will be taken care of and you'll get a 1042S next year.
Yeah, so this year I did not receive it. Maybe next year I would receive it, because this year I claimed the treaty benefit as I read the detail.
Did you claim the treaty benefit?
Because it says in the previous year. this year, but not last year.
I'm sorry, have you created a Glacier record now for this year?
Yeah, like last year, I also had Glacier as well.
Okay, so then each year with your Glacier record, if you want to claim treaty benefits, you need to fill out the form 8233 and provide that form to our payroll office, and then they will apply your treaty benefits and issue a 1042-S based on that. So as long as you've done those things, then you should be getting a 1042-S next year.
Got it. So should I worry about this year? Because last year I did not do the things and get the form currently.
So you can still claim your treaty benefits for last year, even without a 1042-S. That's correct, right?
Sorry,
Doug?
I cannot.
That's
Yeah.
correct, Rourke. Zisheng, it sounds like you have other people in the background asking questions, so it'd be nice if you muted your mic in between so we can hear a little better. So yes, that's correct, Rourke. If you didn't receive a 1042-S and you're eligible for treaty benefits, you can still claim that treaty benefit on your tax return. The 1042-S makes it cleaner, but doesn't not having it doesn't exclude you from using it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see any other hands raised at this time. I was kind of going through the chat to Rourke as best as I could. And I think you said, Rourke, next week there's a
Yes.
tax workshop on California, right?
Yes, next, I think Wednesday at noon.
Okay.
We'll have the California franchise tax. Broker.
Cool. Go ahead, Kamut. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I came here in September. So I started my postdoc job in September 2023. I am from India. So I just want to know, I know you mentioned lots of things, but I just want to make clear that I just need to fill 8843 form and 1042, right?
So once again, Rourke, J1 postdoc is going to be a J1 scholar, correct?
Yes, I am J1 scholar, and I came September 2023.
Okay, and you had income in 2023, I assume, from postdoc. You received some sort of income from your work.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So you, if filled out correctly, you should have a 1042-S. Well, no, maybe not, right? Because they're Indian scholars, right? But so just a very important distinction. If you expect to be in the US for more than 2 years, then you probably shouldn't claim the treaty exemption, because the US tax treaty with India for foreign scholars has a retroactive clause that if you spend more than 2 years in the US, then you no longer qualify for the tax treaty benefits at all from your first day entering.
So sorry, I'm not getting. So I don't need to fill any form and anything if I want to stay more than 2 years?
So if you need to stay more than 2 years, then you should file Form 1040 NR and report your income as taxable for this year.
Okay.
And I'm assuming, did you receive a W-2 or a 1042-S from UCSD?
Yeah, I think it's on UC Pass or something. I get some, I get W-2 form.
Yeah, so I would report that if you intend on being here longer than 2 years, I would report that W-2 income and not claim treaty benefits to make it exempt.
Okay, so no treaty benefit, just W-2 form.
Yeah,
right?
if you expect to be here longer than 2 years.
Yes, I am expecting long, so I just need to fill. I just need to fill one form, that is W-2. That's it?
No, W-2 is already filled out for you. You use that W-2 to file your tax return on Glacier Tax Prep.
Okay, file tax return. Okay. Okay, so you are saying there's like 8843 and 1042, all of these forms for the.
You won't have a 1042-S, right? That's not something you fill out. 1042-S and W-2 are something that's issued to you, right? So you go on Glacier Tax Prep, you'll answer all the questions, you'll have a NR, you'll have a Schedule OI, you'll have a Form 843, a California 540 NR is probably the 4 primary things you'll see. Well, yeah, you can do state on Glacier Tax Prep, right?
Okay.
No, only
Okay.
federal.
Oh, sorry. So you can only do federal, but I believe within Glacier Tax Prep, there's a link to Sprint Tax. Is that correct, Rourke? That allow you to do this on Sprint?
No, they don't link to Sprint Tax.
Okay. So Glacier Tax Prep will prepare your federal return, but not your state. Sprint Tax will prepare both, right? I think Glacier you can with UCSD, but if you want to file both, you should use Sprint Tax.
Okay. I think I'm getting something. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Great. Well, thank you all for attending, and thank you so much, Doug, for sharing your expertise with us today. It's so wonderful to have you available for our group of scholars and students on our campus.
Of course. No, thank you, Rourke. I appreciate the opportunity, and I will be back next year.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.